Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball podcast and your BadAzz sessions. Our BadAzz sessions are set up to help you be a better fantasy baseball player. So, welcome aboard today, and this is part 2 or episode 2 of the 4-part series in the BadAzz sessions, which are meant to help beginners and some intermediate players out there. You might be wanting to sharpen up some of your game in the fantasy baseball world going into this 2023 baseball season. It's sure an exciting time of year, and we're going to get started. You can go and see these presentation slides that are are outlined to this episode 2 of BadAzz Sessions. So if you want to follow along, you can go to our website at www.badazzsports.com. BadAzz is always with 2 Z's. BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast. And as part of the podcast nation, we are going to do these BadAzz sessions. So without further ado, we'll get started. If you've already seen the first episode or first installment of the BadAzz sessions, it was a little bit of an intro, pretty much general in nature. So if you didn't catch that and you want to go back and kind of start from the very start, you're more than welcome to do that on your favorite platform, whether it be on the video platform on YouTube or audio platforms of Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on the website as well. Again, at www.badazzsports.com. You can also catch me on Twitter at Roto_Rudy. That's Roto, ROTO _Rudy, RUDY. And my name is Rudy. I'm the host of the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast. And I'm here today to help you along in our second installment here. So let's start talking about it. And the topic is finding the right league, which is certainly important. So, as you can see, this is the slides for presentation that we'll be talking about today, and some of the subject matter topics we'll talk about are fantasy baseball platforms, league types, game formats, head-to-head versus roto, scoring systems, and team name, and other stuff if we have some time. So there's so many different formats and so many different games and leagues and platforms that it really is. It can be a daunting task sometimes. You're wanting to, maybe you're brand new to fantasy baseball, and you're trying to figure out exactly where to start, where to go, which one to pick, or sometimes those platforms and decisions are made for you, especially when you're in a friends and family league where someone may have already decided to be the commissioner and set up all those systems for you. And oftentimes that's just how people get into a specific platform, to be honest. That's exactly how I started, which was going into utilizing the Yahoo Fantasy app, and and that's what I got accustomed to. And I kind of liken it to your cell phone. I think a lot of people, when they get started with an Android, they tend to stick with that unless they have some bad experience or what have you. And then people that go with an iPhone stick with an iPhone. And I think similarly, we do that with fantasy sports as well. If you've already played in the past fantasy, some other fantasy sport, whether it be football, hockey, basketball, what have you, and you've been playing in a format, platform, or whatever that you like, then I would always encourage you to stay in that, especially early on your first season or first few seasons of playing fantasy baseball. Some of the primary fantasy baseball platforms to choose from are some of your traditional names. Yahoo, which is something is my primary platform that I utilize, and that is definitely one that I believe is the premier platform for playing fantasy baseball. There's ESPN. There's the NFBC, which is a part of the National Fantasy Championship platform, and they call it NFBC, the National Fantasy Baseball Championship, as that baseball segment of that. And those kind of lead the way. You also have CBS Sports has a fantasy baseball site as well. It's a good site. And there are many others out there, but those are kind of the legacy ones that have been around for a little bit. Yahoo Fantasy started in 1999, so they've been around a bit, and they offer a free fantasy service, and I think that's a good whether it's football, baseball, whatever you play. The Yahoo platform is free, so you can literally play with absolutely with no money involved at all. Even though Yahoo's maybe not the lead in the industry when it started, as far as just in general, when Yahoo started as an internet provider, a browsing service. Even though they're not a dominant presence in that field anymore, they've hung around and stayed relevant and been a leader in the fantasy platform, which has still remained to be one of the most popular of all. They have, and of course, fantasy head-to-head league leads the way in popularity, and certainly Yahoo has honed that their platform very well. I believe it's the easiest to navigate and research, and I just think the gameplay is really smooth and easy to utilize. And especially so if you're new to fantasy baseball, I highly recommend the Yahoo platform. And if you follow and join this community here in the BadAzz fantasy baseball universe, then and you're new and you haven't picked a platform, I suggest you pick the Yahoo platform, because I'll refer to that more specifically in the things we talk about. Most of the things we talk about within BadAzz baseball, fantasy baseball podcast is going to be centered around or focusing on from the perspective of the Yahoo platform. But it is relevant to the other major platforms that I briefly highlighted earlier. One of the things I like about Yahoo as well is it has a very good desktop version and a super good mobile version that I think is superior to the other competition out there. ESPN started in 1995 with their online fantasy platform, and I have less experience with it, but the experience I've had with it, it has a ease of use that is a very close rival to Yahoo, if not their equal. So I think it becomes kind of a personal a little personal preference when it comes down to it. You could basically flip a coin and go with CBS, ESPN, or Yahoo, and I can't say that the experience would be any less or more in that decision. So you'll have to, but making that decision is important to move forward. I mentioned the NFBC earlier, and I think one of the things that makes them a very strong platform is that if you are interested in playing for money, as we discussed in the previous BadAzz sessions, a lot of people gravitate towards the NFBC platform. They have a lot of uniquely conceived games, a broad spectrum of game types and setups. Their most notable game that they have within their platform is called the Main Event. And they have really huge overall payouts. And there are many well-known people in the fantasy baseball galaxy, so to speak, that would that are a part of that are players within that format. So it attracts a lot of I would call heavy hitters in the industry, and so that community it's a very competitive community, and again, it involves money. So when you start thinking NFBC, if your decision in deciding whether you're going to play for fun, money, or a hybrid of that, if money is any part of that equation, then I would suggest you would check out the NFBC. We'll talk about the NFBC and some of that uniqueness and some helpful tips out there, especially as the community grows. The BadAzz fantasy baseball community grows. Depending on the number of people who are involved or interested in NFBC, we can certainly talk and discuss those unique things within NFBC that make your strategies of play much, much different than in a standard 12-team league, which is what I will basically focus on throughout the baseball season. My experience personally playing within the NFBC, and I don't mean to knock it in any sense, is it's very different in its scoring and its roster setup, and it really requires you to take a whole almost a completely different outlook on your strategy, whether not only in your draft strategy, but your in-season play strategy is just quite different. One of the beautiful things about the NFBC is, and I have not participated in this personally, but it is a exciting opportunity, I think, if you're interested, is that each year in March of each year they meet, and I say they are players that want to play in the league and want to attend live drafting in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, you can go online and play in the NFBC on their platform and join any of their formats online and never go anywhere and attend a live draft. But if you become experienced and you like the NFBC format, certainly that's something that's exciting to put on the travel plans in March and head out to Las Vegas, where you can do some join live draft leagues, season-long leagues in the NFBC, and meet other people within the industry and probably have a hell of a time. Who needs to have their arm twisted to go to Las Vegas? So that's a big kudos to the NFBC folks for setting it up and doing that. I think that's a beautiful idea. I'm not a real fan, after playing the NFBC, of their traditional 15-team 2-catcher league. I I just really felt like you're really getting down into what I call dumpster diving for players on the waiver wire. And if you're a beginner, like many of you are who are focused on the BadAzz sessions, this may not make sense to you at this moment. But essentially, they have more people on their roster, more teams competing, and therefore you have to go deeper and deeper into player rate rankings and ratings that are much, much lower. So just means you're dealing with a lot of players that I just don't personally like to deal with throughout the year. Personal preference, though. My first personal experience with the NFBC was in 2021, and I thought I'd line my BadAzz up and give it a shot against people who I listened to on their podcast. And so I joined what they called a main event qualifier, and that was something that I could get in online on, and I didn't feel like plunking down $1,750 to play the main event, because that's what the entry fee was. At least it was that season. But I played this main event qualifier, or the acronym they use for it is MEQ. And what that was for $125 you could play in a season-long league, same format as the main event. But what the prize is within each league, 15-team league. If you win that 15-team league, then you win a automatic qualifier for the next year's main event. So you essentially don't pay the $1,750 entry. You win an entry into that main event the next year. So it's $125. There's an overall for the main event, or there was that year, of I think $175,000 for the winner. And in each individual 15-team league, if you first place, I believe, got $7,000. So there's money on the line. There's money to be made, and if that's something of interest to you, you find yourself really getting into fantasy baseball and being successful at it, that's always something that can spice up your fantasy baseball experience. My personal experience in that season of 2021 was I finished 7th out of 15 teams in my league. Now, I learned a lot. I learned more from what I should have known or needed to know than what I'd learned from being successful. But I think if you're a relatively new player, I think I would recommend not to get into some of these leagues until you have a few years under your belt, or at least a couple years under your belt of playing against some really tough competition, and see how you line up before you get in there with money. But that's just my opinion. You can do whatever the hell you want to do, though. But again, I have no personal stake in any of these platforms. This is merely my opinion through experience in it. So hopefully it helps you in making your decision. There's different league types, and when you break it down, there's so many different choices and variables within this that oftentimes it's just overwhelming and confusing and hard to make a good decision on what type of league. And there's, like, in general, there are public leagues and there are private leagues. A public league is one, just as it says, for the public. Anybody can go out there and check it out. You can join the league. Each platform, pretty much all the platforms that I know of, have have, and here I am again, have league types that are public, that offer public leagues. So it's basically you can join any league that's available, and there's so many. It's just I could talk for days about how many different opportunities, but I think that's for the people that I want to help, and you, those out there who are interested. I want to take it down to a level to where we make good base decisions on what we play, and so we can have a better experience. We can have more fun if we know what the hell we're doing, right? So you got public leagues and you have private leagues. Private leagues are something too you probably had experience with if you were in fantasy football ever, and that is where, just like it says, it's by invite. It's an invite league, so a lot of people will generalize and call it a friends and family league. But it can be people at work or what have you. But it's a league that you invite or you allow certain people to join that league as a member of that league. Within those public and private leagues, whatever you choose to be a part of, and you can be a part of both. You can experience it. Might be a good experience to join a public league and a private league, and you can do all that within that single platform that you choose. So if you're playing on Yahoo, certainly you can play one of their public leagues, and I recommend playing in the same format, like a 12-team league. So, and then you can maybe find some friends and family league somewhere where it's a private league and it's invite only. Or you can step in and create your own league in those platforms and invite whoever you want and develop it and design it however you want, however many teams in the league, yada, yada. So I don't suggest that if you're new or relatively new in the fantasy baseball world is just to jump in and be a commissioner of a league. But hey, if you want to go for it and be really badass right off out of the chute, then go for it. So those decisions can be made, and then you can move forward and say, okay, I'm going to join a public league, and there are different type of leagues that are set up as far as your roster is concerned. That is a decision too. The most popular is called a redraft league, and you may hear this term from time to time. Let me get my screens right here. From time to time in a redraft league, you'll hear that term, and a redraft league is the most popular league in this when discussing league types, is because redraft simply means that each year when you play fantasy baseball, you'll draft a new team. There's no carryover from this season to the next season. It's the same as what you've probably been familiar with in other sports, fantasy sports like football, where most of the leagues are redraft leagues, and each year you redraft an entire team. There's other formats and platforms that offer other type of leagues, like what they call a keeper league. And a keeper league is nothing more than, just in a general sense, imagine that you have in a redraft league, each year you'll draft and have a roster of 23 players, okay? And let's say of those 23 players in a keeper league, you would be able to keep a certain number depending on the way the draft or the league is set up. There's a predetermined number of roster players that you draft or you pick up during the year that you can retain for the following year, or maybe even multiple years, what have you. But that's why they call it a keeper league. Nothing more, nothing less in a general sense. Remember, redraft leagues, we draft a new team every year, dump, start completely over, and redraft a complete roster again year after year. Keeper leagues, predetermined number of roster spots are saved, and different rules involved. Much too much to start talking about at this point, but we will certainly touch on throughout the season keeper league considerations with playing fantasy baseball. Finally, there's the dynasty league, and you'll hear that a lot, and you'll say, what's that code for? And that's really like keeper leagues, and I think with the exception of that you retain even more of your roster spots throughout each season, and it can get very and I personally do not have experience playing in dynasty leagues, so I'm not really an expert or a person to talk about those other than describe them in a general sense of what they are and what they do. But imagine dynasty leagues being more representative of what being an actual general manager is like. And the reason is because it's a multi-year, year over year over year of keeping players. And some of these leagues even have minor leagues. And I mean, it gets very, 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 very in depth. I think that if you really want to take on, in my opinion, something that a league that would really be challenging, the dynasty leagues would certainly be one that you would be should be interested in looking into further. We won't talk about that a lot. We may hit on it if the community grows and that's what you want to talk about, hear about, and listen about. Then we'll certainly go down those roads together, and we'll maybe create a league and start building it and learning it together. I think that's a good way to learn anyway. Plus, we'll have a hell of a good time together doing that. All right, game formats. So if it wasn't enough to talk about, okay, what platform and then what type of league, and whether it's public, whether it's private, whether it's a 15-team NFBC league or the standard 12-team league and some of your other formats, there are more decisions than you may have thought going into this. But game formats, as I discuss them and talk about them, are generally that you have season-long fantasy games, which that's what we primarily focus on here at BadAzz Fantasy Baseball and on our podcast. Is season-long is just what it says. It's a season-long competition. So when you join a season-long fantasy league and you're playing a season-long league, you're playing from game 1 to game 162. And I'm sure there's other variations, but generally in a standard league, game 1 to game 162. Basically April to October. So daily fantasy is the other option, or DFS as they call it. Many of you may be familiar. Many of you may have played that and had a lot of experience with it. I have some, but not a lot, and I don't sit here again and pretend to be a DFS expert either. We could touch on that again as the community grows, and if that becomes something of interest, we can build this together, certainly, and go delve into the DFS world and talk about how that's different, how your strategies are, and how you would prepare for drafts, how would you play throughout the year. But a daily fantasy is basically, in a general sense, just selecting a roster of players for a single day of action, or maybe multiple days, but we're not talking about playing 6 months of competition and committing to a 6-month uh, league out there, season-long league. DFS, why I guess some people love it. It's just a single gratification kind of thing. It ends and you can get an outcome that day or that evening or whatever. So if you like that kind of format, there's obviously those out there, and most of your major season-long platforms out there, Yahoo, ESPN, CBS, yada yada yada, offer DFS options, and of course there's big ones out there like DraftKings and others that FanDuel and yada yada. And there seems like there's newer ones popping up all the time. So I don't follow that a lot. But I did want to touch on that's an option when playing fantasy baseball, whether you play season-long league in games or daily a daily competition. I think the season-long play, one thing I like about the format there uh, is knowing also there are some leagues set up where you can have daily lineup changes. You can make roster changes, and then there are some leagues that have more restrictions and where you have weekly or uh, uh, roster changes where you can, when changes meaning that you can pick up players and from a waiver wire and drop players from your roster. Not all leagues allow daily transactions. Personally, I'm wholeheartedly in favor of playing in leagues that allow you to move players daily. I always have liked that. I've played in leagues where you have restrictions on picking up and moving, and I just think that's unnatural. So I like the ability to make moves daily. Now, again, a lot of these leagues are not willy-nilly. The standard 12-team league in Yahoo, for example, will allow you to make 6 transactions within a week on a standard format. So it's not like the Wild West or anything, but I'm saying daily transactions can be made up to those maximums. Some leagues are set up where there's none at all. But season-long play, you can check that out too in the league rules and the league scoring. But if it's standard and you're playing in like a public league and it says season-long, you will be on a weekly or a daily schedule, being able to pick up people with some restrictions throughout the week, but be able to make those moves within each week. If that makes any damn sense to you. When you're in some of these weekly type formats, at some point during the week, your roster is locked and you can't make decisions without maybe some exceptions, maybe due to injuries or whatever, things that I know when COVID was really, the pandemic was in full bloom, there was a lot of variables in all that, but now it's pretty stable with respect to that. The rules on that, though, are few, giving you the ability to make moves, is my point, within a week. And that format is not my personal preference at all. While it's a little more open when you're allowed daily moves in your standard formats, I think it does require a little bit more management on your part to be competitive. And you may want to consider that too when you're considering time that you're wanting to dedicate to a 162 game season. So we'll get down to a term that you'll hear a lot, especially when you get to the point where you're ready to join a league, or you're ready to prepare to join a league, and you start doing like mock drafting. And that's just basically practicing for the draft and getting your tools together to build your team and play, is you'll want to make a decision on whether that league you join is a head-to-head competition or it's a rotisserie, or Roto, as it's abbreviated, acronym. So you got head-to-head and Roto. These are the differences, basically, in my opinion, is when you're talking about head-to-head, why I love head-to-head, and I'm not necessarily in the majority. There's a lot of, I think head-to-head may be the most popular by numbers. But I will tell you there's a significant community of people who prefer Roto play out there. So we're going to certainly talk about both of these in this in our BadAzz Fantasy Baseball podcast, and certainly during this BadAzz session, is to talk about what your considerations should be with respect to head-to-head versus Roto. And again, these presentation slides are on our website at www.badazzsports.com. Head-to-head, the reason why I love it, playoffs. Did you say playoffs? Playoffs. In the words of Jim Mora, famous words from a NFL head coach. I believe he was an Indianapolis Colts coach at that time when he said that. But anyway, head-to-head playoffs have playoffs. So if you love to play playoffs, then you want to be in head-to-head. You go head-to-head is what it says. When you're in, let's say, example, a 12-team league, you're going to play those teams, a different team each week. You're going to play them head-to-head, just like they do in sports. You're going to play them head-to-head. Each week, winners are determined, and the league standings are published. So that's a pretty standard format. You're playing in a 12-team league. You got 11 other competitors you're up against. You're going to play them rotating throughout the season in order. So you'll play them and replay them, and it cycles throughout the 162 game season. I think it's 25 or 26 weeks, and I'm sorry I don't know the specific, but when you play the weeks of competition, I believe it's 25, 6, 7, somewhere in that range of weeks of play. So head-to-head's playoffs. So if you love that excitement, and to me, that's huge. After the draft, in my opinion, the playoffs are just, that's where it's all won, in my opinion. So I'm partial to head-to-head, but I do also play Roto. Roto, or rotisserie, remember from the history where that came from. It's a restaurant in New York City. So Roto leagues have no playoffs. But maybe some people that love Roto will say, well, we have it's a playoff every week. Well, I don't know. Not really, because winners and losers are not determined in a week or a month even. The single winning determination is at the end of the season. And what I mean by that is, let's take a 12-team league. Whereas head-to-head, you're playing each team in your league from week to week, different players. And scoring, the scoring is, I'm sorry, I'm stuck here. The scoring is accumulated head-to-head on that week basis. So a determination is made. Outcomes can be 10-0 for you or 0-10. It'd be an over or somewhere in between. So there's a determination at the end of the week that you've won that week or you've lost that week, and then your standings are updated in your league against your other 11 teams, if that makes sense. Some of those head-to-head leagues, not the standard leagues, and it's not predominant, will score it at the end of a head-to-head competition week, will score it. If you win in the categories, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, you win most of the categories, you get one win, and the team that you're playing that loses would be 0-1, would be one loss. So, but it's predominantly, follow with me, a 10-0 outcome, 0-10 outcome, or somewhere in between when you're doing head-to-head competition. So, rotisserie, no playoffs, and you'll take 12 teams, and instead of competing against each one of them individually week to week, you're competing against all those other 11 teams every day, every week. So you, instead of having a league standings based on wins and losses of categories each week, you will move up and down the whole league of 12 teams based on your performance in each category each day. If that makes sense. And so you have to understand, I guess, categories too, and that's what we're going to talk about, the scoring systems. There are categories, scoring systems, and there's points category systems. Scoring systems. So within categories, as we talked before, that's the statistics that the fantasy baseball will use to determine winners. So the most popular categories league in standard in most platforms are what's called a 5x5 categories league. What that means is that there are 5 categories, batter categories for the hitters, and there's 5 pitching categories. And you're going to compete against, either head-to-head or in rotisserie, against all those categories. In standard 5x5 scoring, the 5 batting categories are runs scored, home runs, RBIs, stolen bases, and batting average. The 5 pitching categories in standard leagues are wins, saves, strikeouts, ERA, and WHIP. If you don't know what any of those terms are, there's glossaries out there everywhere, but it's essentially ERAs, earned run average for pitchers, and WHIP is walks, hits, and innings pitched that make up that acronym. Category leagues, again, going back to those scoring outcomes, can be anywhere from, in 1 week when you're playing another team head-to-head, can be a 10-0 outcome to a 0-10 outcome, and somewhere in between for that week. So you could win 6-4, lose 6-4, win 7-3. There's ties, obviously. You can tie that category. So it could be 8-1-1 or what have you. But hopefully that makes sense, that within those categories, when you're playing in that standard league format that I discussed, then those outcomes and scoring are based on those categories. And there's many, many, many variations in leagues that utilize different categories. I know a lot of leagues replace batting average with OPS, and there's just any number, as many as there are categories of statistics in baseball. You can dream up a league with those scoring categories in it, so to speak. But that's the standard play right there. Okay, so the other scoring system is a what's called a points league. And to me, that's very similar if you've had experience in the fantasy football world, because that's typically what they kind of base their scoring system on in standard leagues. And that's generally where points, instead of assigned to a breakdown of various categories, and you compete against each other, home runs to home runs, runs to runs, RBI to RBI, and you're competing against each one of those categories. Points are assigned for each stat category. And let me give you an example. If you've ever played fantasy football, it's like a running back would get 1 point for every 10 yards of rushing. And a wide receiver would get 1 point for every 25 yards of receptions. And in this case, in baseball, it's the same thing. When you play in a points league, then when your player hits a home run, it's worth so many points that day and so many RBIs. And so they'll have a certain number, a total point value for that individual player that's on your roster. And when you have those rosters with those players, those points are obviously tabulated, and a winner is decided based on the greater number of points, based on that point system that gives so much value to each category. So a little bit different, and a little bit different strategies when weighing player values and rankings, and I don't want to get too far ahead when you talk about being in a categories league versus a points league. But if you're relatively new, or you have just played, consider yourself maybe a intermediate player, like I did for a long time. I felt that way. I still do some days. Some days I feel like a damn beginner as well. But you have to start somewhere. And categories is a good way to start, because it is the primarily used scoring system. And I think as part of this BadAzz session number 2 is I would want to finally discuss a very brief but simple, but it may seem trivial, but I think an important part of playing in fantasy sports in general is coming up with a team name. There's nothing worse than joining a league where, and I don't care. I mean, if you don't care, I don't care. But think about this for a minute. So if you don't pick a name when you join a league, Yahoo, I know in particular, and the other platforms do as well. If you don't pick one, they will default one for you. And that usually doesn't bode well. There's some really shitty names they come up with, like my nickname is Rudy, and that's what I go by. But in the system, it goes by my real name, Jay. So it'll default. If I don't pick a name, it'll say like Jay's Magnificent Team or something like that, or Jay's Great Fabulous. It's just ridiculous. So now you're not obligated, I know this in Yahoo, to retain that name forever. You can change it, whenever. But I think, if first impressions are lasting, when you join your league, kind of come up with something that makes it funny or something interesting or something related to you or what have you. And you can talk later. We will talk later and actually do some screenshots of picking, selecting, and doing all these things functionally, how to do them on the Yahoo platform. If you're just starting out, we'll walk you through that on some of these sessions that are coming up. And again, we have episode or BadAzz session number 3 and number 4 coming at you too, prior to our mock draft period that we'll be doing on our live podcast. And we'll also be talking about in-season play coming up. But you got to pick a team name, be fun with it, do something really damn cool about it, and change the icon, and put an icon that you like having that represents you. And it may be something lasting. It may be a name that you keep forever, and you're known as this name or that name. Personally, I've picked up a name in fantasy baseball that I like using, but again, from season to season, I may change my mind. But last year was I called my team Moonlight Graham's Nuts. So I'll talk to you later about that on a live podcast sometime about how I come up with Moonlight Graham's Nuts. But it has some thought to it, and I like using it, and I laugh when I hear the name. So pick a good name that makes sense for you, that's fun, that's exciting, that says that you're a badass, and you're coming into fantasy baseball this season to kick some ass. So this about wraps it up here with finding the right league, and I hope that from this that you can now do some exploration into what we talked about, and then come back and listen and be a part of the next session where we start talking about preparing for the draft. So if there's any homework between this session and the next session, is come up with the path, the platform that you're going to use, the scoring, the league type, and the scoring system. Go back and rewind this, and if you need to rehash some of those parts, develop decisions now that you want to move forward with. Or if you have questions, then send them to my Twitter at Roto_Rudy, and I'll be glad to answer any of your questions in reference to what we've already discussed. But to prep for the next session, again, on drafting, have all those decisions made or clarified before we go into that session, and then get ready to roll your sleeves up, because while you may not necessarily be able to crash your league with a bad draft, you can certainly put yourself behind the 8 ball and behind your other 11 competitors. So you'll want to definitely be ready for the draft preparation session and get ready for the 2023 baseball season. Again, it's been a pleasure to be here today, and I hope you've got something from this. Feel free to send me a message at Twitter, or you can write me as well on Facebook at BadAzz Fantasy Baseball. Again, thanks for being out there. Let's build this community together. Let's all be badasses, and I'll see you at session number 3. Goodbye.